It is your Thursday daily delivery. I'm Michael Rand. Happy to be back for another day. Hope you guys are all having a great day out there today. Kids back in school, snow plowed, shoveled, snow blowed, however you got it out of there. A little bit of everything for us. You can get places. Everything's all right. We even brought the kids to Sledding Hill yesterday. Got them outside playing in the snow. Haven't had snow like that all year. Man, that was a lot of snow. I feel like here in Egan, we got somewhere close to a foot. I don't know what the official count was, but it kept growing. It just kept growing and growing, like someone exaggerating a story every time they tell it. It was like earlier in the week, it was like 1 to 3 inches. Like, all right, that's fine. Then it was like 3 to 5. I'm like, oh, that's a pretty good snow. Then it was 4 to 7. Then it was 5 to 8. Then it was 8 to 10. And then it was 10 to 12. And it was just like, it just kept growing and growing. And it was right. By the end, it was right. That was all the snow we got, was almost a foot, which was crazy. And now we're digging out from under it. It should be gone in a few days. It's going to be like 60 degrees next week. That's the beauty of a March snowstorm. We didn't come here just to talk about snow, though. We came here to talk about lots of stuff, including the Vikings. Andrew Krammer will join me here in just a minute to talk about them, about his trip to Indianapolis for the scouting combine. Free agency starts in 4 days on Monday. That's when teams and players can start negotiating. Sam Darnold, still a question mark, although they didn't tag him this week, which makes a reunion with the Vikings, in my estimation, less likely. But plenty of other holes on this roster filled in both the draft and free agency in the next couple months. Andrew and I will get into who they might be looking at, what positions they might be looking at, things of that nature. Some extra Viking stuff at the end of the show. But first, what did I miss? This is a basketball-heavy opening segment because 3 teams played yesterday and 3 teams played significant games yesterday. Let's start with the Gophers women's basketball team. They lost to Washington again in the Big Ten tournament. They had just lost to Washington at Williams Arena towards the end of the regular season. Gophers finish now 8-10 in the Big Ten, and then a Big Ten tournament loss, 20 wins overall. They're going to have to sweat it out for like 10 days now to find out whether they're in the NCAA tournament or not, or whether they're going to be in the kind of the next tournament down, right on the bubble. My instincts tell me that a team that doesn't really have a signature win, that didn't really beat anybody great this season, that struggled down the stretch, that finished as the 13th best team, and albeit a great conference, it's a tough case to make. Maybe they get in still. Maybe they make it in and squeak in, on the strength of, playing a tough schedule in the conference season. Maybe that gets them in. I don't know. I think it's precarious right now. I think a win over Washington certainly would have helped their case a lot, because then you're talking about, a 21st win, a better win, a team that's been red hot. I think Washington's won 5 in a row. Head coach Don Plitzowite saying there might not be a hotter team in the country right now than the Huskies, and she may not be wrong. That is a team that is ascending, certain to get into the NCAA tournament, I would think, at this point, with the strength of how they're playing down the stretch. Gophers, it's another story. Beset by injuries again this season, particularly to Mara Braun. Still, you would have liked to see them get this to the finish line in a little bit better shape. One more win, one good win somewhere along the way probably puts them in much better shape. They just didn't get it. They didn't get it anywhere along the way. Didn't get a signature win this season. Wondering if that's going to cost them when bids are handed out here at the end of the season. Gophers men's basketball team put up a good effort against Wisconsin. That game at Williams Arena, it was like tied. Gophers even had a little bit of a lead, 5-6 minutes left, but Wisconsin pulls away for a 74-67 win. Enjoyed Chip Scoggins' column. Chip was on earlier this week talking about his high school project. Chip wrote about the Gophers, what they might be doing with the revenue sharing money that they have to distribute starting next season, expecting that to become finalized in April. $20.5 million distributed to players. It's a brand new thing. It's not the same as NIL, but it will supplement the amount of money that is kind of in this big pool that is now going to the players. And his reporting suggests that the Gophers are going to be aggressive in using that money on the men's basketball team. Now, a lot of the reporting has suggested so far that the NIL money that they've raised so far has largely gone to the football program. I don't think they've had a ton of money for men's basketball, and I think that has cost them in recent years. But if they can kind of bridge that gap with now this larger second pool of money and use a lot of that to retain, recruit, things like that, that should help them going forward to build their rosters. Now, Chip's good question, and one I've been asking for months now, is if they are going to increase the amount that they are spending, does that mean Ben Johnson should get a chance to coach with those increased resources? He's been coaching without many resources, right? He's been coaching with, bare bones, lower NIL. They've lost guys to the transfer portal to NIL. This year is obviously the huge example where they lost a bunch of guys off last year's team. Farrell Payne, Elijah Hawkins, Braden Carrington, bunch of guys left after last season. Cam Christie went to the NBA. That's different, but if you bring back the core of that team, even two of those guys from that team, put them on this team, maybe a different outcome than the team that is currently 7-12 in the Big Ten right now. So does Ben Johnson deserve a year or two to coach with a more robust pool of money to spend on players? Or is this an opportunity to make a clean break, to bring in a new coach and say, hey, look, we're beefing up our commitments here. We're beefing up what we're spending, making this position more attractive to somebody else? It's a good question. Probably depends on what kind of job you think Ben Johnson has done with the resources he's had. I think it's going to be a coin flip. I don't know what Mark Coyle's going to do. It doesn't sound like Chip knows exactly what he's going to do, but good reporting to let us know in this piece that it sounds like Coyle is ready to spend more of that money coming in next season on the men's basketball team. Now, before we get to the Vikings, can we talk about Jaden McDaniels and the Timberwolves for just a minute? Jaden McDaniels, terrific again Wednesday night, 29 points. Fifth time in 9 games, in his last 9 games, that he's gone over 20 points. The Wolves win their third in a row, 3 straight comfortable wins over teams they should beat, but teams that they, you still have to go out and play. And, they routed Phoenix the other night. They kind of hung around with Philadelphia, but then pulled away for a pretty comfortable win eventually on Tuesday. And then kind of a start to finish dominant performance against Charlotte last night. Second game of a back-to-back at Charlotte. Kind of coasted to the finish line. No real headaches there. They shot the lights out. They played really well. They shared the ball. The offense is humming lately. So you've got that. But Jaden McDaniels has been kind of the individual story within this team story. 24 of his last 25 games, at least double figures in points. During that stretch, I did a game log look at him. During that stretch, last 25 games, Jaden McDaniels, 16.6 points, 7.7 rebounds, 2.7 assists, 1.6 steals, and 1 block per game. He's got his fouls down. He's only averaging 3 fouls a game. Not that many turnovers. Shooting free throws at an 88% clip. The only real quibble is that he's still not making a ton of threes, although that's been getting better lately too. I think last night he made 3. He was 3 of 9, but his last 4 games he's made 7 threes. So at least he's kind of rounding into slightly better shape. 8 threes in his last 4 games, 8 for 21, so close to 40% there. So he's shooting it a little bit better. His 2-pointers, his overall field goal percentage during that span, over 50%, giving them a bona fide option, a bona fide scoring option. It used to be that he was more of what you don't know what you're going to get in a given night, and it still can fluctuate a little bit. But when you're talking about 24 out of the last 25 games getting at least double figures, that is a baseline of scoring. And a lot of that came, of course, with Julius Randle sidelined. It came when Dante DiVincenzo was out. Now you're talking about those guys are both back, and he is still rolling, giving them another dimension in the offense. So Jaden McDaniels turning into a bona fide scoring threat is a key storyline, not just for this season, but future seasons. Gives them something else to think about as the season progresses. Julius Randle was terrific last night, too. Almost had a triple-double. I think it was 25 points, 10 rebounds, 9 assists. Could have gotten kind of a janky last assist at the end if they would have wanted to play that way, but they didn't play in the right way. But he had a great game. He's been looking good since he came back. He and DiVincenzo have not looked rusty at all since they came back. 35-29 overall now. Still with that schedule that's favorable. You got Miami tomorrow night. That's not an easy game, but again, that's a team that has been kind of in flux all year. Jimmy Butler trade, stuff like that. Then you got San Antonio after that. San Antonio, a team that, was looking like it could make some noise toward the play-in, but then lost a bunch of games. Victor Wembanyama out for the season, so that becomes an easier task. Just got to take advantage of this stretch. They're doing it so far. They've been impressive in how they've been responding, playing hard, playing well, focused against Charlotte last night. That was the most impressive thing to me. Focused from start to finish, even against an inferior opponent. Took care of business, did what they needed to do. Can they keep doing that over the bulk of these last 18 games?
Open a smart checking account at Royal Credit Union to get no monthly fees, no minimum balance, and a $250 bonus. See details at rcu.org/checking bonus. No minimum balance required to obtain bonus. Offer ends 5/31/25. Insured by NCUA.
Let's bring in Andrew Krammer from the Star Tribune right now to talk Vikings, a busy offseason. Andrew just got back not too long ago from Indianapolis. So, Andrew, how was the combine for you?
It was good. It's always an experience. Always a late nights, early mornings kind of stuff. They get the college kids up obviously earlier than us with the 5-6 a.m. wake up calls and the medical exams, but then those guys end up getting to the media sessions. We're talking to Max Brosmer at 8 a.m. So after a long night, it's obviously it's useful, productive for both NFL teams and for media.
The biggest storyline there was Sam Darnold for most of the Vikings, at least Vikings-wise. So we're going to get into free agency, who they might be looking at in the draft, who they might be looking at in free agency, possible guys they could even lose off of last year's team. But Darnold was the big question. Like, this was all happening. A lot of the are they going to tag him or not conversation was happening during the combine because the deadline was Tuesday. Vikings did not put the franchise tag on Sam Darnold, which basically means that they have a chance to sign him still, and it sounds like they are potentially interested at the right price, kind of like what they were saying last year about Kirk Cousins before he signed with the Falcons. Where do we stand with this right now, do you think, in terms of, what not tagging him means, what happens between now and Monday when free agency, discussions can begin?
Yeah, we've discussed really ever since the season ended that they've been open to keeping Sam Darnold, whether or not it's, possible, depends on his market and what he ends up commanding. But the Vikings are going to have a line on him, a value on him. We don't know what that is. We didn't know what it was on Kirk Cousins a year ago. And obviously the Falcons came over the top. And the expectation is that some other team is going to come over the top of Sam Darnold's price. And you can kind of sense from the Vikings public comments certainly about it that they're open to the idea of him leaving. They know that they talk about their time together in past tense. Kevin O'Connell saying he's happy to have been a part of his journey and a big part of his journey. Sam's just set himself up to strike at this moment in free agency. He has never been this kind of commodity before. So, and there's more teams that need quarterbacks this time around than there are available starters in free agency. And on top of that, Sam is at a point right now in 2025 where the draft class that's running concurrent with him at the position is not great. Joe Shane, the Giants GM, said down in Indianapolis, ideally we draft our next quarterback at number 3 overall, but he said, I don't know if that guy's in this draft. And so that's quite the admission 2 months out for all NFL teams that are very aware of the strengths and weaknesses of draft classes years in advance, not just 2 months in advance. So they know that the teams know that there's not a bona fide star in this draft class. That could push Sam Darnold's price up. Our colleague Ben Gessling reported yesterday that the Vikings are still open and in contract talks with Sam. So confirming that as of March 4th, yesterday, they were still open to bringing him back, but we have a long way to go. We've got, a week here until free agency officially opens, 5 days before he can officially agree with somebody else, or 4 days from Thursday of this week. So things could change, certainly, and I expect his market to heat up. And I don't sense from the Vikings that just because they didn't tag him, it would signify that there wasn't this robust market to trade him, certainly. But I still think from what we've heard that they're kind of anticipating that this guy's probably going to get an offer elsewhere that could trump theirs, while hoping certainly that they get him back at the value that they would like.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to make sense because, they're going to want him. Any kind of Darnold reunion here I mean, unless we're completely reading this wrong and they would want to sign him to a multi-year contract and then kind of like make a different decision with JJ McCarthy. That doesn't sound like something that's in the cards. So any kind of Darnold coming back here scenario seems to be on essentially what would be a 1-year deal, because you don't want to keep, you don't want to burn too much of the JJ McCarthy, rookie contract type stuff. So he almost has to get to free agency to find out what his market is. Like, I don't feel like the Vikings are going to sign him sometime before Monday, unless we're just reading this all wrong, right? Because it has to be, he has to get to the market to find out what his market is fully.
Well, yeah, and tampering happens though, and
of course, yes.
these guys do get a read on it. And I remember sitting down with Sam Darnold before the season, and he had mentioned last year's free agency, and he said, "Well, we were always waiting for the Kirk domino to fall to see where my options were going to be." And he didn't say this. I'm not quoting him, but he alluded to finding out the Sunday before, and saying that he had to sleep on it before deciding Monday or something like that. And it was just funny to kind of hear that from him, because things happen, things get, you get whispers, you get ideas of what your market's going to be. And certainly I think at this point he's got an idea, but you want to hold out. It's just smart business to wait up until deadlines to make sure that another team's not going to come in that you weren't anticipating, or that a deal is going to get increased based on something.
Right.
There's all kinds of things that can happen. So generally it behooves free agents to wait as long as possible until that market officially opens. So you kind of know, the money can't be gone until the money starts getting spent next week. So I think that's why it would help him to wait. So you're right. I don't expect him to agree to a deal before then. But at the same time, I do think he's got a decent idea of what he's looking at. And I think the Vikings do too. They talk to these representatives. You see reports and we hear things of like, oh, they met with Trey Smith's representatives. Well, that's because Trey Smith's representatives also rep some Vikings players. Like they're going to meet with all of these guys. They're going to talk about other guys that these agents rep. And so that's how this stuff gets shared.
So it just seems to me the most likely scenario here is Darnold goes elsewhere. McCarthy is given every chance to be the number one quarterback in 2025, but they bring in a veteran to kind of buttress whatever might happen with McCarthy. And maybe that's Daniel Jones. But even that's like, Daniel Jones has been a starter in this league. It's not guaranteed that he's just going to want to be here. And then the quarterback market seems to kind of like be a little squishy. You read like, some teams might be interested in Aaron Rodgers. And like, I don't know how much of that is posturing and how much of that is like not fully committing. Like Darnold is clearly the best free agent quarterback on this market for someone who wants to make a commitment. If you just want to like have a stopgap for a year, you can do something else. But if you're like looking for your guy for the next 2 years at least, he is clearly the best option. But it feels like the market is kind of weird right now.
It is. And the Vikings situation, frankly, is weird right now, because if you're Sam, you might be told that you're going to be the guy coming back here, but if he comes back here for next season, but how long is that leash for him? If he has a Jaguars type game in the middle of the season where, let's say they're winning, but he is awful in a game that he shouldn't have been, does he get pulled in that moment for a JJ McCarthy? If JJ McCarthy were healthy last year, I wonder. Yeah. Not necessarily that there were too many times Sam could have been pulled last year, because he played phenomenally throughout the season, but there could have been a moment where he was, if it didn't go so well. And so this time around with JJ in year 2, presumably being healthy, coming off this knee injury, you got to wonder if you're Sam, in terms of the market being weird, his situation here might be weird. It's not going to be the same exact thing. So I do think this is going to come down to Sam making those decisions. I do believe, there's little reason to believe he wouldn't get at least another offer elsewhere, whether it's the Titans, whether it's the Giants, the Raiders are also in dire need, and the Steelers as well, if they don't end up bringing back Wilson or Fields. And so of those 4 teams, I imagine somebody else is going to be in on him. And then that's up to Sam of, is this, let's throw out 2-year, $80 million offer. Is this really something that I want to jump into with the Las Vegas Raiders as their stopgap? Or would I rather go back to the Vikings on a 1-year, whatever kind of deal, and just bet on myself that I can keep this job, keep JJ on the sideline, and then try to do even better than I did the year before? So it is fascinating. And a lot of it's going to come down to how Sam views these situations and frankly, how much he wants to bet on himself.
Yeah, I think it is interesting. I think the chances of him being back here are pretty small, maybe 5 or 10%, but we'll see. You never know. We got some time, and the Vikings, in addition to this quarterback question, there is plenty to sort out in free agency and what you guys just learned and talked about at the combine in terms of draftable players, who they are interested in the draft. Now, they don't have a whole lot of draft capital. We're talking about a first-round pick, 2 fifths, and then probably what we imagine is a third that will come to them in the compensatory pick. But that's, end of third round. We're talking about, probably like pick 100 or something like that. It's not going to be a super high pick. So what are they looking at in free agency? What are they going to prioritize with this $60 million or so in cap space? And who might they positionally look at in the draft?
Yeah, they've got money to spend coming up here in free agency, and they've got a lot of guys out of contract, specifically on defense. When you look at starting with Byron Murphy Jr. to Cam Bynum to Harrison Smith, who could very well retire at this point. Stephon Gilmore also seemed to seriously be considering retirement too. And then their interior defensive line, some of their edge players, Jihad Ward, Pat Jones, Jerry Tillery, Jonathan Bullard, they could kind of clean house a little bit and start fresh if they decided to do another wave like they did last year, where if you remember the start of free agency, it was the trio that they all did the press conferences with of Jonathan Grenard, Van Ginkel, and Blake Cashman. That was kind of their prized group that they brought in last year. They could do that again with another 20-some, trio of 20-somethings on defense that could really help bolster what was a very old group last season. So when you look at free agency, there's a lot of good corners, not just Byron Murphy Jr. He might be one of the top ones, but there's a lot of guys that make sense, including the Jets' DJ Reed, the Lions' Carlton Davis, who played in Tampa Bay before that and had some good matchups with the Vikings. Charvarius Ward, too, Kansas City via San Francisco. He's a tall, lengthy press corner that would fit what they're trying to do. These guys are all probably going to cost, though, $15+ million, maybe around or below that if the market gets suppressed by the quantity of guys out there.
Sure.
But they could sign one or two of them. And there's guys like Rasul Douglas. There's some middle tier guys, too, who could be available that could help them. And so corner's a spot that I would expect them to add at least one or two veteran guys, considering that's a position that generally you want, guys who have some experience in as you train other positions. And it was interesting to hear down at the combine that they met with Derek Harmon, who's one of the top interior defensive linemen out of Oregon. He's huge. He's like 6'5", 300 pounds. He led them in pass rush pressures last year in college football for the Ducks. And he's somebody that'd be like that 24th overall pick for them. And I bring that up because free agency, it's going to cost a lot to improve that position on the interior. When you look at there's a Dallas Cowboys defensive tackle who just signed for $20 million a year, and he's not a household name. Like, he had a good year last year, 4.5 sacks, a lot of pressures, but he's not a guy that even you hear about as much as Milton Williams in Philadelphia, who had an even better year last year for the Super Bowl champs, and as somebody who could command over $20 million a year. Christian Wilkins was the top D tackle last year. He got $27 million on the open market, and now the cap has gone up even more. So Mike, it costs so much to address the trenches in free agency, including guards, which we fully expect them to go after. If not a starting center, Drew Dahlman with the Falcons is the best center available, and he's probably going to cost $10, $12, $14 million. But if they're serious about, as Kevin O'Connell said, remaking the foundation of that interior line, don't be shocked if they blow all of it up. Move on from Garrett Bradbury, decide to bring in a brand new starting center for a young quarterback, a veteran center, from a really good offensive line in Atlanta. So there's options. And there's a lot of guards too, even with Trey Smith getting tagged in Kansas City. Tevin Jenkins jumps out to me from Chicago, and Vikings fans are going to wince at the reference of Chicago's offensive line, but this kid's really good. His issue's just been health, and is somebody who could help them immediately. And it was interesting to see too that Chicago just traded for Joe Thuney, reportedly from the Chiefs, after trading for Jonah Jackson from the Rams. So their guys are going to be available, and Jenkins is somebody that I would keep an eye on too.
That's funny because I saw Jenkins on one of those free agent lists. I can't remember if it was on our side or somewhere else, but I was like, he kind of fits that mold where they like to get value because he's a talented guy who's, like you said, injuries have been more of his issue. Health has been his issue. They like betting on those guys, the upside, and thinking that they can do things to keep them healthy, or think that those problems are behind them or were a little bit of bad luck versus this is not a quality player.
Yeah, and he's been kicked around too, and they like the versatility of positions, guys who can move around. He was a tackle in college, tackle as a rookie at Chicago, but they moved him to left guard and then right guard, and so he's bounced around, and he's actually done, according to Pro Football Focus, because we don't chart every Tevin Jenkins play, but according to PFF, he has improved every single year as a pass protector and has always been a good run blocker, which is something we all know the Vikings would love to add.
All of that discussion, naturally circles back to the quarterback question, which is that they have so many needs right now, or seem to have so many needs, that spending half your cap or more than that on a quarterback just doesn't seem feasible. That's frames part of this discussion. And I wrote about this earlier this week, where it's like, in different times of the NFL, you'd be like, what are you, crazy? You want to get rid of the quarterback that just came in and went to a Pro Bowl, threw 35 touchdowns, 4,300 yards, took you to a 14-3 record? But I feel like everybody now is so attuned to the economics of sports and not just how good a guy is, that they're like, well, yeah, good riddance to Sam Darnold. We got to save all this cap space for all these other guys, and JJ McCarthy's cheap and young, and this is the way it's going to be.
Yeah, and the Vikings know too. They just watched the Philadelphia Eagles, and I think Jalen Hurts is a one-of-a-kind quarterback. And obviously, when the tush push, the short yardage thing, to have that very few guys are capable of doing that. But I'd argue that they didn't win the Super Bowl because of Jalen Hurts. They won it because the Philadelphia Eagles are a very well-rounded team, San Francisco and Detroit-like in terms of how deep they are in the trenches. And they remake their secondary in a single offseason with Cooper DeJean, Kenyon Marshall. They already had Darius Slay. The whole front seven of theirs is just drafted every year in the first, second, and third rounds. They're phenomenal. And the Vikings see that. They know that it takes a complete team. And when you talk about salary cap space, allocating so much of it to quarterback, they didn't get to this point, and I'm speculating, but this is based on hearing them talk about this stuff for years. Yeah. They didn't get to this point where they cleared the decks. They finally don't have a ton of dead cap room. They ate $26 million, I think it was, in Kirk Cousins' dead money last year. They moved on from that. I don't think they got to this point to suddenly slap that kind of price tag on another patchwork quarterback when you drafted this kid, JJ McCarthy, to be the guy. And they had to go through the discussions this offseason about Sam. They all had to get on the same page about Sam after a very confounding and what Kwesi called tough evaluation of him last year. But clearly the rhetoric is not indicating that they came away with a higher thought on him than they did at the end of the season collectively. So I think they got to this point to have the decks cleared, have the money to spend, and really put their imprint on this roster in a way that they've kind of had to patchwork along the way, because you've got an Adam Thielen here, a Dalvin Cook there, you've got a Kirk Cousins there, in terms of guys on the books that really aren't the long-term vision for what they're trying to do. And now they've got some capability of doing that. So I expect a free agents, not frenzy, but I do expect a slew of moves of outside guys to bring in to help them. And if you sign Sam Darnold to a 1-year, $30 million deal, you can do some things with void years to spread the cap hit out. You can make it only count $10 million on the books, and it wouldn't hurt. It wouldn't hurt all that much. So there's ways to do it, but what Sam might be looking for is, as you've talked about, Mike, his chance to strike on that first big payday that he just, since getting drafted, he has not had, obviously. Yeah,
I think that's probably going to rule the day, but we'll find out next week a little bit more about that. Anything else, like combine-wise takeaways that anybody you visited with, anybody that kind of anything that struck you while you were there?
Yeah, it's interesting to me to hear them talk about this running back draft class. And there was speculation. The great Daniel Jeremiah with NFL Media, who's like the industry standard in terms of just draft analyst scouting, he put the Vikings as taking a first-round running back going into the combine. And talking to him about that, he had said that he felt like what the Vikings saw with Jahmyr Gibbs in the division, what they saw with Saquon Barkley, that's just what they were missing, is that explosive piece in the backfield. But then talking to other people about this draft class, there's also the sense that it's so deep and so good at running back. And Kwesi said this, where he goes, and I don't think this is a mistake, he goes, well, we could take one in the first round, or we could take one in the fifth round. And you say that because those are the only 2 rounds he's got draft picks.
Right.
And I think he's very aware of, like, you could find a very good running back in the 3rd or the 5th round this year. And I wouldn't be shocked if that's where they end up addressing this. Because even if they bring back Aaron Jones, which we continue to hear is a possibility, it would be on a short-term deal, and it would be with the eye that they need to add a better complementary piece to him and an explosive piece that they thought Ty Chandler could be.
Right.
Ty Chandler has the speed. He has the athleticism to be that guy. He just could not put it all together as a complete efficient runner or a complete running back, frankly. So they need to add somebody with the skill set, the home run ability that can complement Aaron Jones, who we saw was getting caught from behind on runs at the end of last season.
Don't want to have to trade for Cam Akers a 3rd year in a row. That's for sure. Maybe you want to address that at some point. Yeah. So let's end here with, next week free agency starts. What are, like, let's say you talked about them being pretty active early on. Are we thinking like corner and the interior of both lines might be the things we see happen first?
If I had to bet, it's going to be the educated guess at this point is that they're going to look to address corner and interior offensive line. We do hear good things about this offensive line class, but we hear better things about the defensive line class and just how much defensive linemen are going to be costing. And when you especially look at the available interior O linemen in free agency, it seems like there's more options for them to repair the O line coming up here in the next 2 weeks than it will be waiting until April. And we just know how that's gone for them, waiting until April. If you're not going to spend your 1st round pick, it really is kind of a swing to see if it's going to be a 3rd rounder or a 5th rounder that could truly come in and make a difference. I wouldn't be shocked if they add 1 or 2 new starters on the O line here this next couple weeks in free agency. And then with corner, that's just a spot that they are in dire need. They have so few options. Right now it's Mekhi Blackman, it's Dwight McLeathern. They want to, from everything we hear, they want to prioritize bringing Byron Murphy back. That continues to be somebody that they are all in on to bring back. But even if they do, they still need more help with Gilmore and Griffin out of contract and really no sign that those guys are going to end up coming back. So yeah, the 2 positions I fall on are corner, O-line. I think defensive line, because it's not just those interior guys. I think we mentioned it's Pat Jones, it's Jihad Ward, it's rotational guys that, they could add through the draft, but they could also end up bringing in some veteran guys, much like they did last year with all these names we mentioned, who are on 1-year deals to kind of patch it together. So what we do know is that Brian Flores is going to be heavily involved. Anybody with a Brian Flores connection, we're going to be sorting through those here through this week and into this weekend. Those are the guys that stand out. And Van Ginkel was the big one last year. They're going to be looking to add guys that Brian Flores is telling them to add.
Awesome, Andrew. Well, appreciate it. Good work from the Combine. Good luck in these coming weeks. It'll be fun, interesting. We just want a resolution to the Darnold question as fast as possible. I would think that's probably the biggest thing, right?
Well, he's the next domino to fall. That's just it. Yeah. When he talked about Kirk being the big one last year, he's the big one now. So with Stafford staying put in LA, people are going to be waiting to see where Sam Darnold goes, specifically Daniel Jones. If Darnold does not come back to Minnesota, I think it'd be hard for Daniel Jones to not want to replace him here, considering what he just saw from the Vikings and from Darnold, and considering where his career is at. Because his other options, when we're speaking of Daniel Jones, are what? To go to the Indianapolis Colts and compete with Anthony Richardson? I mean, that might be a good system, but the Vikings obviously have one of the best offenses, skill talents surrounding their quarterback, and they just showed what they could do for a reclamation project like Sam Darnold.
Awesome, Andrew. We'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mike.
Great stuff from Andrew. If you are interested in more on the Vikings, the Cooler tells you right now that StarTribune.com has a cool feature today. Vikings writers at the Star Tribune kind of give their opinion. One free agent on defense that they would sign if they were the Vikings. No surprise, a lot of corners make that list, but you also see, I think, a defensive lineman as well. So those are the positions of need for them right now going into the offseason. Those are the positions that they will be looking to fill, whether it's through the draft, whether it's through free agency, whether it's through both. They are going to have some holes to fill this offseason and some money to spend in order to do it. That will do it for me today. Lavelle Eniel III expected to join me on Friday's show from Florida. Daily Delivery debate. Probably going to make it all Twins this time since he is in Florida covering the Twins at spring training. So look forward to that on Friday. Until then, I'm Michael Rand. Have a great rest of your Thursday. Back at it again tomorrow.